Whether you are a Republican or you are a Democrat, you should be extremely concerned that the party that controls the White House can use taxpayers' dollars to direct the vast federal bureaucracy to influence vote behavior.
So the order by design isn't about registering all types of voters or all voters of every political persuasion. It's about registering a specific group of voters.
Does it have any authority to spend any of this money for electioneering based on what the Congress has authorized?
It does not. Health and Human Services is involved. The Department of Labor is also involved with 2,300 American Job Centers. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is allowing food stamp funds, administrative funds, to be used to pay for voter registration participation services. And the one you just mentioned, sir, HUD, sent guidance to the executive directors of more than 3,000 public housing authorities, managing about 1.2 million housing units, advising them on how to run voter registration drives through public housing agencies.
I spend 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year thinking about how I can help small businesses. I think that's what the SBA should be doing from the internal side.
Do you find that odd that the Small Business Administration is involved in getting out the vote in a state that President Biden is down in and absolutely needs to win to stay president?
Absolutely.
At this point, it's very difficult for them to access credit.
But it's more important for them to get that than to be talking about registering to vote, right? They need money. They want access. They want to keep their businesses open.
Absolutely.
Now, elections are for the American people to get their voice heard, not for federal agencies to interfere with. Whether you are a Republican or you are a Democrat, you should be extremely concerned that the party that controls the White House can use taxpayers' dollars to direct the vast federal bureaucracy to influence vote behavior. We heard that these activities are being carried out in a nonpartisan way. Well, that simply is not true. The SBA has the ability to choose where they hold events, and from the publicly available information, they are choosing to spend majority of their time in Democratic strongholds. So, Mr. Whitson, can you please respond if you think the administration is carrying out this order in a way that is equally representative to Republicans and Democrats alike?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. If you don't have to take my word in answering that question, you can actually take President Biden's word. And so if you look directly at the executive order itself, it says that it's focused on underserved populations. So the order by design isn't about registering all types of voters or all voters of every political persuasion. It's about registering a specific group of voters, which the Biden administration describes as underserved.
So, quick follow-up. While the SBA is engaging in these electioneering activities, their research is relatively small compared to other agencies. So, can you discuss some of the other agencies that could misuse this power and describe some of the methods that they could utilize?
Thank you again for that question, Mr. Chairman. So obviously the key behind this whole order is the complete lack of transparency. So what little we do know, though, is disturbing, and so this comes straight from the White House, and here's some examples. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has transformed more than 1,400 federally qualified health centers located across the country into voter registration hubs under the NVRA. And so what does that mean, voter registration hubs? It means that not only do they hand out voter registration applications, but they also can help people fill out the applications and then collect the applications with the promise to turn it into the state on behalf of the voter. And now remember, in the executive order, it called on these agencies to do this behavior, but it also said to work with, quote, approved third-party organizations to allow those organizations, so non-government NGOs, to come into the federal agency and engage in the voter registration services. And so there's a real risk that those approved third-party groups, that no one knows who those groups are necessarily, we've been able to uncover a few, that those are the ones that are being allowed to come into these federal agencies and actually engage in the voter registration activity.
Is voter registration a partisan issue benefiting one party more than another?
Voter registration here is nonpartisan, and in the case of SBA, it would be available to anyone who availed themselves of it.
Whenever we talk about this executive order, it would appear to me that the federal government is, under the Biden administration, is expanding its ability beyond what the law says. Would you agree with that statement?
I would.
I think Ms. Danetz a minute ago said that the states have authority over elections generally. There's a few things that from 30,000 feet the federal government has. And then she made the comment that the Congress authorizes some activities. If there's any activities, other election activities that happen, it should be under the authority of Congress, not that of the administration. Would that be correct?
That's correct, and I would add that it's by law.
By
so
law.
Congress can only by law, and which means, like, as you know, both houses
Okay,
have to
so
pass.
authorization of money is by law as well, right?
Yes, sir.
So in other words, the administration, does it have any authority to spend any of this money for electioneering based on what the Congress has authorized?
It does not.
In what situation would you want to recognize or be willing to partner with the federal government? They don't really have any authority to do this, can't spend money to do it, and yet would ask you to do this in conjunction with them. How's this going to work? Or if
I will work specifically with the SBA when it comes to businesses, when it comes to our business services division under the Secretary of State's office. Anything regarding elections, I was honored to share with my testimony today that as the first Latino Secretary of State, I'm the only one who goes to all the minority communities, to rural Indiana, everywhere, to register eligible Hoosiers to vote. That's my job, and my team and I have blanketed the state to make sure that every eligible Hoosier has the opportunity to vote.
Does this designation break or follow the law? Because those on the other side are implying that this is breaking the law. Does this break or follow the law?
Thank you for this question. This is actually a straight application of Section 7 of the NVRA. In addition to the mandatory voter registration agencies, each state must designate one or more additional agencies, and among those, federal agencies can be included with their agreement. That's exactly what happened here, where Michigan designated SBA, SBA agreed to it, and they determined how to implement that.
So have you heard any other agencies engaged in this? Like, there's been some rumors about HUD being involved.
Yes, so I mentioned that Health and Human Services is involved. The Department of Labor is also involved with 2,300 American Job Centers. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is allowing food stamp funds, administrative funds, to be used to pay for voter registration participation services. And the one you just mentioned, sir, HUD, sent guidance to the executive directors of more than 3,000 public housing authorities, managing about 1.2 million housing units, advising them on how to run voter registration drives through public housing agencies. And so federal housing officials also advise the local agencies on how to apply to become, quote, voter registration agency under the National Voter Registration Act, and how to set up drop boxes for ballots on the premises.
What laws do you think could be possibly violated here?
I mean, so I think there's a few. The first one is the U.S. Constitution and the Administrative Procedure Act. So Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1, times, place, and manners, that leaves the times, places, and manner of elections to state legislatures with limited oversight. And so controlling how, when, and where registration takes place is the manner.
But, right. By the way, when Mr. Robinson made his statements that they would only meet with Democrats in Michigan, that held true. There are, 5 Democrats were met with out of 7 in those 8 trips. Never was a Republican invited. And in her trip to Pennsylvania, 4 trips to Pennsylvania, also a swing state, she certainly never invited me or any Republicans that I'm aware of. So moving along, the voter registration efforts under this MOU primarily are targeting Democrat voters in Michigan. Why do you think that is, Mr. Whitson?
Well, I think it's because it's a key battleground state. And I think the reasons you've mentioned, too, as well, you have key people from that state. And so it's a place where you don't need a lot of votes to make a big impact.
So is this unethical or illegal in your view?
It is both, in my view.
Do you believe that should Americans be concerned about the SBA involving itself in the elections process?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. The SBA should be focusing on helping small business owners. I believe small business owners are the backbone of our Hoosier economy in my state, and that should be their role. It has to be a clear separation, as you stated. We cannot generate confusion, because if people go there asking for a loan, and then they will find an application form for voter registration, that may generate confusion. That is why my election division under the Secretary of State's office, that's when we step in. We're doing everything we can to register as many eligible Hoosiers day in, day out, Congressman.
Yeah, I agree and appreciate the answer. Question for you, Ms. Parker. Our founders masterfully created the Declaration of Independence, which outlines our values, and then the Constitution came along and enshrines our values. In your view as the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation, how can America get back to these basics and stop interference like this?
That's a great question. As far as Americans, they do want to see their government work for them. They want to see their government function normally, and they don't want to see one side tip the scales for the other. And that is what the SBA is doing. I see the SBA's role as maybe an internal version of me. Essentially, they should be advocating to the administration when regulations are going to hurt small businesses. That's what I do. I spend 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year thinking about how I can help small businesses. I think that's what the SBA should be doing from the internal side.
On what facts are you basing the allegations that the SBA has become an arm of the Biden campaign if you don't have facts and knowledge about that?
The reporting that I've seen is that the SBA is going into specific areas of Michigan and doing targeted voter registration. It's not in the mission of the SBA to do that at all. And as a former business owner, I understand all of the challenges that small businesses face.
Have you verified those facts?
I've seen them reported in the media.
Is the Memorandum of Understanding even in effect? Is it even being implemented?
I don't know the answer to that right now. What I've seen reported is what the memorandum
So you don't know the answer.
states.
You don't know if this is even in effect yet. And it is my understanding, as we've heard today, it is not in effect yet. It requires still an additional executive order by the governor. And yet you have said that the SBA has abandoned its duties for a memorandum that isn't even in effect yet?
Well, I believe that the goal is to put it into effect because that's why it was written.
But when you said that you wanted the SBA to return to its duties, what is that based on? How has it turned away if this memorandum is not even in effect yet, ma'am?
That is the goal of the memorandum, and if they're going to move forward with that, then...
But it has not yet happened.
That is what you say, yes.
You disagree?
I don't have knowledge.
You don't
What I
know,
have is
but
the
yet you
report.
testified to the fact that it has. But you're admitting now that you don't know.
The
Is that
spirit of
correct?
the memorandum is to go into targeted areas of Michigan and register voters, and that's problematic as a small business advocate.
But you don't. But you don't know. Is what you're telling me about the implementation of this memorandum currently?
What I know is what's been publicly reported.
Let me clarify. The MOU is absolutely in effect. It is absolutely in effect, and it was in effect from day one when it was signed. We know that the URL exists. Absolutely, the URL exists. I would suggest you look it up. If we need to send that out to the rest of our committee members who seem to be blind on this, please let's do that. I'm going to ask staff to make sure that we're doing that because apparently some members of this committee don't understand what's happening at the SBA. And by the way, we would love to know how often that URL is being used, but guess what? We don't. Because we have made requests repeatedly to the SBA for further information. They have been ignored. So all of this questioning about what we know and what we don't know, it's impossible to find out because the SBA won't work with us. They will not give us information. So what we do know is what's been reported. We know what's been signed. We know that it is in effect. But in order for us to know how efficient it is, we would actually have to rely on our own agency to respond to a congressional committee's request for information, which they have not done. So I appreciate my good member on the other side asking those questions and asking for verification. I would also ask that she sign on to our request for information from the SBA to be able to say whether or not what they're doing, because we know where their dollars are going. We have no idea what the outcome is. This is typical of working with this administration.
In your opinion, sir, why is the SBA involved itself in election process and registering voters in swing states?
Thank you for that question. So this is part of the executive order. It commanded every single federal agency to take part in this whole of government, get out the vote effort to benefit the Biden administration. And so SBA is one of those tools. And so Michigan, as we mentioned, it's well-known fact that it's a key battleground state. And so it doesn't require a lot of votes to make a significant impact. And
Right.
so that's
right.
what it appears.
What does the SBA stand for, Mr. Whitson? Do you know?
It's the Small Business Administration.
Do you find that odd that the Small Business Administration is involved in getting out the vote in a state that President Biden is down in and absolutely needs to win to stay president?
Absolutely.
Yeah. You said that there's other government agencies doing this as well, Mr. Whitson. Can you go over those real quick?
Yes, so again, that's the Health and Human Services has transformed more than 1,400 federally qualified health centers located in states across the country into voter registration hubs. You got the Department of Labor has turned more than 2,300 American job centers, again, scattered across the country into voter registration hubs. USDA, Department of Education is allowing federal work-study funds to go to college students to become an army of workers for left-wing groups engaging in voter registration activity, again, in strongholds where there's more Democrat votes than there are Republican. So
Yeah.
the list goes on.
Imagine that. You also said this was more alarming than the Zuckerbuck scheme by the Democrats back in 2020. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think that scheme offers the perfect illustrative example of what's going on here. And so Zuckerbuck's people could look at it on the surface and say, this looks funny, but it was only until after the election when we could go in, FGA went in, and we got the exact numbers of where money went, which counties and what amounts, that we could have the proof. And so this is that same scheme, but instead of $400 million, it is the unlimited funding, resources, reach, and power of the federal government and its agencies in every state. So it's Zuckerbucks
Yeah.
on steroids.
And we don't even know how much they're spending yet, do we? Because they won't be transparent about it, right?
That's exactly right.
That's what I thought. Ms. Morales, why do you think the SBA is involving itself in, Mr. Morales, why do you think the SBA isn't involving itself in your state, in Indiana?
Well, they're not involving Indiana. I wish they have come to my state and talked to me. Like I say, I would love to work with them when it comes specifically with businesses.
Yeah.
Helping our Hoosier business.
Yeah, they seem to have forgotten that that's their main focus. But I'll tell you, sir, the reason they're not involving themselves in your state is because I checked, and your state is a Republican plus like 11 state. So it's a Republican state. That's why they're not. You're not a swing state. That's why they're not involving themselves there. Do you believe this is election interference, Miss Elaine Parker?
I do believe it's election interference when you're going into a targeted area of state to register people for election. But again, I believe that the SBA should be focused on the small business and advocating for small businesses within the administration. There's a regulatory onslaught that's happening against our small businesses, disproportionately hurts them, and that's what the SBA should be focused on, is protecting
Absolutely.
their interests.
Absolutely. We've got rising inflation, right? Overregulation, real disposable income down 7.5%, 21% increase in credit card interest rates. But according to Tyler Robinson, who happens to be the special advisor to Administrator Guzman, Robinson claims in a video, this is him saying it, not me, that SBA Administrator Guzman is the most traveled cabinet member, visits battleground states with Democrat members of Congress to help them and Biden get reelected, and that she indirectly campaigns for the president by announcing or highlighting investments in certain communities by the Biden-Harris administration to sway support. But our Democrat colleagues will have you try and convince you to believe this stuff isn't even going on. It's unbelievable. I've heard from the other side today that the act of voter registration, it's not partisan. We all heard that, right? The act of voting, that's not partisan either, right? We heard that. Well, is it when you're targeting blue Democrat-run cities, counties, municipalities? Is that partisan? What do you think, Mr. Winstrom?
It absolutely is. And so it's what campaigns do, right?
Yeah.
Campaigns engage in get out the vote efforts, and they don't try to get out the vote of every kind of voter. They try to get out the vote of the voters that will put them in office. And so that's the problem, is now the federal executive branch is engaging this. A federal executive branch led by a member of one political party is using that apparatus to engage in a get out the vote scheme.
Yeah, and imagine that. And we hear it from the other side about, oh, this is undermining democracy and bipartisanship. Are you kidding me? You guys just tried to put your number one political opponent, President Trump, in jail, right? That's what you're trying to do right now. And now this. And it's just a couple different things. We're not buying any of it, okay? I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Why Michigan and not Florida?
Because the state officials in Florida have not approached SBA relating to designation, as in Indiana.
What about Ohio or Mississippi or any other state that is not considered blue or necessary to win for President Biden?
Again, the White House's statement makes clear that SBA would be willing to be designated in any state where a state official makes that designation. So because voter registration, the mechanics remain with the state, it is up to the state official of each state to approach SBA and make a designation.
All right. And I'm sure for everything that you have heard here during this hearing, that the optics of this program is pretty dubious. The optics are just, and I'm going to give you just a few facts, so then I want to hear your opinion. Michigan is the only state, right? Coincidentally. After 1 week after this agreement between the state of Michigan and SBA, all of a sudden the White House announces that it's going to establish 15 campaign field offices across the state. Optics are not really clear there. Michigan is a swing state. Michigan has polls from every corner of the political spectrum saying that President Biden is down. The evidence, circumstantial evidence, optics, whatever you want to call it, is pointing that the Biden administration is using taxpayers' money, that's illegal, to increase their chances of winning re-election. That's very illegal. So I just want to ask your opinion. You are an advisor, you are a consultant. What do you say to the optics that I just narrated?
Michigan is not the only state that has designated a federal agency. And quite frankly,
Is the only one that has right now an agreement with the state of with the Secretary of State, with the federal government, meaning the SBA, which is the same thing. Feds, SBA, same thing, state of Michigan.
so because of the structure of the NVRA, there's no specific way that each state has to undertake the designation process. So for example,
No, we're not saying that they have to, but Michigan did take it. 15 field offices were opened, and that's why I'm saying the optics. Don't you see something wrong with what we're saying?
What I see is that there are agencies designated in states across the country, and this hearing is focusing on Michigan because of
How
the
many
SBA.
other states have the same type of agreement between a federal agency, meaning the SBA, in order to, like you said, 30 years ago, this program started to promote and to go to the business owners and say, hey, let's don't even talk about what you need right now. If you need to buy computers or you need a small loan, let me help you register to vote.
Kansas, New Mexico, Arizona.
Do they have the same type of agreement between
They have
federal agencies?
designated federal agencies, and those federal agencies will be providing voter registration services.
But they are not in place right now. They haven't started, like Michigan started a week ago.
I am unaware whether they have been implemented
So I
yet.
go back to, so you're trying to give me just a little detail. I'm saying the whole optics. Don't you see what we are seeing?
I am personally thrilled that agency-based registration is expanding across the country to provide nonpartisan voluntary voter registration services to Americans.
Stop right there, nonpartisan. How do we know that if this is an initiative from the Biden administration in a state that is a swing state, how do we know or not know that the members of the SBA, Mrs. Guzman, we know that she's an advocate for the president, is really going to give the opportunity to that person that wants to register Republican? We don't know
Congresswoman,
that.
I am actually thrilled you asked me this question, so thank you very much. There are many layers of protection to ensure nonpartisanship.
You just take 1 minute and elaborate on the lack of transparency, because I think that speaks to the accountability piece of this.
No, I think that's exactly right. Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. And so if this was above board, if it was everything the other side claims it is, wouldn't you be shouting from the hills the details of this plan? Wouldn't you be proud to go on and say exactly what SBA is doing and where it's doing and how it's doing it if it were above board? And so the lack of transparency is a huge problem. It was a problem from day one. The order came out in 2021. My organization, FGA, filed a Freedom of Information Act request to answer these questions, to say, we'll take your word that this is above board, and we just want to see the details to make sure that's the case. And this is going to shock the members, but we were stonewalled. And so we sued the Biden administration in federal court in Florida, and that lawsuit is still ongoing, but what we've uncovered is the same kind of alarming stuff. So we found listening sessions with left-wing groups, coaching the agencies before these strategic plans came out, coaching them on what their strategic plans should look like. And so we can see the participants at these listening sessions, and it's all the same left-wing groups, and one of them, Demos, who actually crafted the plan, this whole idea of using executive order to exploit a section of Section 7 of the NVRA that had never been used in the 30 years existence of the NVRA. Never had this section been used that's being used for the first time by Biden's team. There are other agencies under other parts of the NVRA that the other witness was alluding to, but not under this section. This is the first time, and that's according to the White House, because they bragged that this was the first time ever in the 30 years existence this had been done.
If the purpose of the executive order is to register voters on a nonpartisan basis, why didn't the SBA enter into an MOU with states that have lower voter registrations than Michigan, which is at 91%?
Again, as I said earlier to another Congress member's question, SBA's ability to enter into these agreements is contingent on state election officials or the states making a designation. In December of 2021, the Biden administration made clear that SBA was available for designation, and I imagine Michigan was the only state that stepped forward.
Through our investigation, this committee has uncovered that a majority of SBA events have occurred in the southern portion of Michigan, mainly in Democratic strongholds. That's crystal clear to the American people. Mrs. Parker, to the best of your knowledge, is this the region of Michigan with the largest percentages of small businesses?
I don't know the answer to that in the state of Michigan.
Where does voter registration rank on concerns from small business owners?
Our small business owners have not registered that in any way, shape, or form. What they talk about to us is the credit crunch, inflation, and issues like that, the onslaught of the regulations that are just killing them.
So this is a map of Michigan. These areas down here, as mentioned before, Michigan is a Democratic state, pretty much. It's kind of in the middle, but it's nowhere near Indiana is on R+11 on the Cook survey. These areas down here, these counties, are blue strike-through areas. Those have the highest number of registered voters recently. Well, guess what the red dots indicate? Those are the visits by Guzman and the Small Business Administration on this tour to register voters. It looks like they've accomplished what they want. Democrat gains, strong Democrat gains from 2020 to 2022. They have done 15 visits in these areas. The map does not lie. Ms. Danetz said that the reason the SBA isn't in Florida or Ohio because the states did not reach out to the SBA for help. Well, I want to be clear for the record that Michigan did not reach out to the SBA for help. The SBA reached out to them. Mr. Morales, in the short time that we have left, has the SBA volunteered to come to your great state and do some wonderful thing in the great state of Indiana?
They have not yet, and I have yet to meet with them.
Would you like to?
If they want to work with my office, specifically helping small business owners, of course, not for elections.
Well, wait a minute. That's their job, is to help small businesses. You don't want them to come help register voters, even if they're Republican?
When it comes to registered voters, that's my job in my election division.
If no further business, without objection, the committee is adjourned.